Okay, so let's go ahead and knock out our final exam review for PFT 107. So we're going to go ahead and start off with a little bit of basic knowledge in the world of nutrition, kind of just overviewing everything. So more on the biology side of things. If we're looking at what an essential nutrient is, right, that is going to be a nutrient that you must consume in your diet. It's essential because we don't produce any of this stuff, right? Of those, we're going to have two major categories. We're going to have our macronutrients and our micronutrients. Your macronutrients are things that you need in super large quantities, which include proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. And your micronutrients are going to be things like vitamins and minerals. We're also going to have a third category there, which is going to be water, which is the most essential nutrient because it allows us to have a metabolism and do all kinds of different things throughout the body. So first, let's go ahead and start talking about carbohydrates, right? These are big compounds made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen molecules, all arranged in a variety of different shapes and sizes. And so they're basically, when we break that down, when we say, what is a carbohydrate? It's a big complex chain of sugar molecules, right? It's all of these individual sugars that come together to form different shapes and sizes. And then depending on how complicated they are, that is what we're going to refer to as either a simple or a complex carb, meaning that it's very difficult for our body to break it down or it's very easy to break it down. But no matter what, their main role is to provide energy for our activity. So for instance, like high intensity activities such as sprinting actually rely almost entirely on carbohydrates as a fuel source. As your intensity climbs, your fuel from carbohydrates is going to increase, whereas as your intensity lowers, your fuel from fat is actually going to increase. So when we're telling our clients, we're instructing people how to consume carbohydrates, we're going to tell our clients to focus primarily on what we call nutrient-dense carbohydrate options, because carbohydrates are an excellent source of vitamins and minerals, which are the micronutrients that we talked about earlier. So if we look at those two primary categories that we were talking about between between like simple or complex carbs, simple carbohydrates are things like monosaccharides or disaccharides, right? These are either like a monosaccharide, which is a singular sugar molecule. And what's cool about like monosaccharides is that they can be used to produce ATP directly, right? Like we can take a single sugar molecule and instantly convert it into ATP. Disaccharides are a little bit more complex because these are actually two monosaccharides attached to each other. So they are still very much a simple sugar, but we can't actually use a disaccharide to produce ATP. We have to break it in half first and then have our two individual glucose molecules, and then we can use that to produce ATP. So a disaccharide is slightly more complex than a monosaccharide, but it is still considered a simple sugar. Then we get our complex carbs, which are 3 or more sugars. So obviously we have like, what are called oligosaccharides, which are, somewhat complex, but not really all that complex. They're still very close to sugars. So those are also things that provide like a lot of energy, but might not necessarily be very nutrient dense. But traditional complex carbs is what we're thinking of when we look at like a polysaccharide, right? Many sugar molecules all tied together. And the benefit of that is the fact that like, because you have this big long chain, rather than just like a big pile of singular sugars, your body has to break that chain down in order to get those sugars. And so it stays in your system longer, leaves you feeling fuller longer, and can be used for like a sustained energy rather than bringing in a bunch of sugar, which, boosts your energy really rapidly, but also then causes your body to have like a flood of sugar, which it'll burn through really quickly. Complex carbohydrates burn much more slowly. And so our primary examples of this are going to be starches, right? Starches are naturally existing carbohydrates that are formed from plants. So like potatoes, breads, pastas, rice, couscous, quinoa, any type of like grain, or any type of like starchy vegetable. Those are all really good examples of naturally occurring starches. And we also have our own form of starch inside the body, which we're going to call glycogen, right? So glycogen is actually made by our body by your body will break down carbohydrates into singular sugars. That way they can get into our bloodstream. And once they're in their bloodstream, our body can actually reassemble them into its own starch, which we're going to call glycogen, right? And it's considered a starch because of its somewhat similar makeup. And that's really great because then if you don't get carbohydrates in your diet, your body can break that glycogen down to produce ATP the same way it would as if it was digesting food that you consumed. Now, one of the biggest reasons to focus primarily on consuming complex carbohydrates is it's also an excellent source of fiber, which is basically all that stuff that you see on the back end when you go to the bathroom, right? That's all of the undigested materials that are exiting your body. Well, fiber is really great because that actually constitutes most of that stuff that's leaving. So by having like a high fiber meal, what that can do is that can actually clean your system out by pulling any materials that might just be hanging out in your digestive system. It kind of cleans out your system here. And so these are fiber or complex chains of carbohydrates that are actually, they're so complex your body can't break them down. So because of that, they don't get absorbed, and then they must pass through your system, which is really, really great. um, the big benefits there are obviously, like, like I said, it does clean everything out, but it also provides your gut bacteria something to eat, which is really important because like your gut bacteria also aids in digestion. And also fiber is going to leave you feeling fuller longer. So it's one of the things we actually focus on when someone's on a diet who might be struggling with like their calorie intake. They're like, this diet's really hard, I'm having a hard time sticking to it. Well, being on like a high fiber diet actually might assist in helping your client feel fuller for longer. Therefore, they're less likely to overeat. Now, we also have fats as being one of our main macronutrients here. And fats are actually very similar in chemical nature to carbohydrates. They're also made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen molecules. They're going to provide most of our energy when we are at rest or during light to moderate activity, right? Like I'm just standing here right now. That's not really like a high activity. I'm primarily relying on fat as a fuel source. Fats are really important for they're vital for hormone production. They also carry certain substances throughout our body, for instance, like fat-soluble vitamins. They're actually dissolved and are carried by fat molecules, which is really, really important. And this is a very high energy type of food. This actually has 9 calories per gram when you consume them. So we're going to break fats down into kind of 2 primary categories. You're going to have your saturated fatty acids and your unsaturated fatty acids. Saturated fatty acids are the ones that actually have filled hydrogen binding sites. And so that allows them to stack really efficiently because they're already kind of in these nice straight filled stacked lines. So that's actually what allows them to be solid at room temperature. But the problem with that is that they are also highly associated with an increase in cholesterols and other materials that actually start to clog our cardiovascular system. So when you're consuming fat, you only want about like 10% of your calories to be coming from saturated fatty sources. The other types of fats that we're primarily going to focus on are our unsaturated fatty acids. And these are going to be split into 2 major categories as well. Your unsaturated fatty acids are going to be split into monounsaturated fatty acids and polyunsaturated fatty acids. And when we say unsaturated, it means that they've got a space for a hydrogen binding site. Remember, our saturated fatty acids, their hydrogen binding sites were filled, which is what allowed them to stack so efficiently. Unsaturated fatty acids have an empty binding site, which allow them to kind of make these interesting little kink shapes. And so they might have like sort of an L shape. And that is what keeps them from being able to stack so efficiently, which is why unsaturated fatty acids are typically associated with things like oils, oily fish or olive oils or things like that. They're liquid at room temperature. So if they have like many binding sites that are empty, that's going to be a polyunsaturated fat. And if they only have one, that is going to be a monounsaturated fat. And both these are really good sources of your essential fatty acids like omega-3s and omega-6s, which are also really important for hormone production and the production of like cells within your body. Now, our third macronutrient is going to be protein, right? And protein is obviously tends to be most people's like favorite macronutrient. They're like, oh, I need lots of protein. But basically proteins are these big complex chains of amino acids throughout our body. So we want to try to get our recommendations here are a little bit different. We want to make sure that we're getting enough protein to repair any damage that we might cause. Now, living an everyday normal life, we're constantly destroying our own cells through like work and activity. So we want to make sure that we reconstitute all of that. So we want to consume about 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight if we are living a sedentary lifestyle. Now, if we're living a very active lifestyle, that protein intake need is actually going to go up substantially, sometimes all the way up to 1.9 grams per kilogram. So there's a lot of different factors that determine your protein intake. Your body weight is obviously huge, right? We just talked about how it's per kilogram of body weight. Your total energy intake is one, and then your training intensity. The more intense you train, the more protein you're going to need. And protein here actually has the same number of calories per gram as carbohydrates. So you're going to see 4 calories per gram there. So I mentioned that it was a big complex chain of amino acids. Well, what the heck is an amino acid? Well, an amino acid is very similar in chemical structure to a carbohydrate or a monosaccharide, right? It's made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but it also has this little side chain of nitrogen, which gives it a really interesting shape. So that side chain can be in 20 different varieties. And those 20 different varieties determine which amino acid you have. So you're going to have what are called essential amino acids and non-essential amino acids. And non-essential amino acids are pretty cool because your body can actually assemble those. It can take carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and a little bit of nitrogen and assemble it in the shape of whatever amino acid you need. So when amino acids come together and they have all of those different shapes all coming together to make something, depending on what order they're in, that's going to determine what type of protein you have. So those proteins could be a muscle inside your body. It could be enzymes that help you break down food inside your body, different types of tissues. Different materials running throughout, and depending on like what the shape of those things are, that's going to determine which protein it is. So the protein from your skin is very different from the protein that make up the enzymes in your saliva, which is very different from the proteins that make up your DNA. But at the end of the day, they're all made of these 20 amino acids, some of which are essential because you have to get them from food, and some of which are non-essential that your body can assemble. But no matter what, if it's something that your body made, it's constituted with all 20 of those amino acids. So an essential amino acid has to be obtained from your diet because you cannot make it. This is where we talk about like what is a complete protein versus an incomplete protein. A complete protein is a protein source that contains all of the essential amino acids in high amounts. So like these are typically associated with like animal products, right? If an animal's body assembled all of those proteins, assembled all of those amino acids, that's the protein that they have. They might not have had a diet, maybe they consumed some non-essential ones, but their body, or maybe they were missing some non-essential ones, but their body assembled those. So if it's an animal product, it's made of all 20 amino acids. Now, an incomplete protein is one that is missing one or more of those essential amino acids. So these are typically associated with plants. They usually have really, really low levels of certain amino acids. So that's what we consider like an incomplete protein. Now, you can absolutely complement 2 incomplete proteins together to make a complete protein. At the end of the day, all of these amino acids are going into a big pool, and that's your body is going to send something from that pool to wherever it needs to go to assemble those proteins. So you could have a diet completely existing of incomplete proteins as long as you are pairing them up in such a way that you are balancing out your levels. And so incomplete proteins are typically going to be what we see in a lot of like vegetarian diets and things like that. Now, when we move into micronutrients, we're going to talk primarily about vitamins and minerals, right? So vitamins are these organic elements that are kind of similar to proteins, actually. They also have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and a little bit of nitrogen, but they'll sometimes have like other materials in them as well. They allow physiologic processes to happen inside of our body. There are a lot of times they're precursors to certain physiologic events. For instance, like vitamin D is a precursor to calcium absorption. So they interact with certain minerals inside the body. And they can be found in a lot of like nutrient-dense carbohydrate options, right? This is another example of where we're talking about drinking carbohydrates. Like you might see the same number of calories between like a glass of orange juice and a glass of Coca-Cola. Calorically, they might be the same. Their sugar content might be really similar, but the difference is one of them is going to be dense in micronutrients and one of them is dense only in macronutrients. So how do we ensure that we're getting nutrient-dense carbohydrate options? Well, trying to consume whole foods is the best way to do this. Consuming foods that are, packed full of these nutrients. However, we will find in certain foods, we will actually add certain nutrients to them to increase their nutritional quality. And this is where you see these two terms, enrichment and fortification. So an enrichment is where you add vitamins to products that have kind of lost their nutritional value. And so that kind of boost their nutritional value back up. So it's adding vitamins or minerals to a food or product that has those vitamins and minerals in it, but maybe only in low amounts. Then fortification is adding vitamins or minerals to a product that might not necessarily have contained those vitamins or minerals in the first place. It's like taking your slice of bread with a vitamin pill, vitamin supplement. So we are going to see like a lot of enrichment and fortification, and they can be an okay way to get into your nutrition, but obviously we prefer whole food sources. Now, two major categories of vitamins that we have got. We have got water-soluble vitamins, which are vitamins that dissolve in water and then they are transported via water. Really good examples of these are all of your B vitamins. It's your entire B complex, as well as vitamin C. And a lot of times, like that B complex, they'll act as what we call coenzymes, which are these little enzymes that kind of kick off. They're like an enzyme for an enzyme. Like they allow enzymes to kind of kick off their metabolic reactions. And then we have fat-soluble vitamins, which are vitamins A, D, E, and K. Actually, I'm going to put that up here. Those are the vitamins that are typically associated with being antioxidants. They help on a lot of other physiologic principles. These are the ones that really tend to interact pretty frequently with our minerals, actually. So these are going to be vitamins B and C. And then over here, we got our fat-soluble vitamins, which are going to be vitamins A, D, E, and K. So then another big term that we're going to see is antioxidants. Now, a lot of your fat-soluble vitamins are going to act as antioxidants, but so is vitamin C. And what an antioxidant is it's a compound that has extra electrons that it's willing to donate away. And so inside of your body, you might get these things called free radicals, right? Which is sort of a byproduct of oxidative metabolism. So a free radical is basically an oxygen molecule that's missing an electron. And so it's trying to get electrons from somewhere in its surrounding environment. It's trying to steal some from somebody else. And unfortunately, that surrounding environment is your body's tissues. So if your body's tissues lose an electron or two, it starts to modify those tissues and they don't start to function as well. So that's where we have vitamins E, C, and A coming in, as well as like a lot of like phytochemicals. These are really prime examples of antioxidants, which are, basically vitamins that have extra electrons they're willing to donate. They act as sort of a meat shield for these oxidizing molecules. So vitamins E, vitamin C, and vitamin A are a really good example. And then phytochemicals are a really good one as well. And phytochemicals are things like beta carotene or cytinine, things like that are giving foods their color. So the more colorful your food is, the more phytochemicals it has, and therefore it is much more likely to be really rich in antioxidants. Now, our other micronutrient that we're going to talk about is our minerals, right? And these are inorganic nutrients, right? These are things that are not made out of carbon. These are usually associated as like other types of metals that are really important inside of our body, right? Calcium gives our bones structure. Potassium acts as an electrolyte. All of those things are really important parts of our metabolism. And so they allow for proper functioning of the body. They're a key structural component, and they can act as electrolytes. They actually have so many electrons, and there's a difference between those electrons that when those electrons actually start to move back and forth, it generates electric charge, which is how our nervous system communicates throughout the whole body. So we got two major categories here. But they don't share like any common traits like fat-soluble vitamins. They all have in common, they're stored in fat and carried by fat, right? Water-soluble vitamins, the thing they all have in common is that water is, necessary for their production or for their movement and dissolving. Minerals are different. Every mineral is different from one another, but we have two major classifications here in terms of how we consume them. And so major minerals are minerals that you're going to consume in amounts greater than 100 milligrams per day, and trace minerals are ones that you're going to consume in amounts less than 100 milligrams per day. So for instance, calcium is a mineral that we consume around 1,200 milligrams per day of, in order to like be healthy, to reconstitute our skeletal system. Whereas and so that would be a major mineral. Whereas like iron is a trace mineral because we need somewhere between I think like 6 and 8 milligrams per day, and so that's way less. Now, our most important nutrient here is going to be water, right? Water is the most essential nutrient. It contains plenty of hydrogen and oxygen and allows for certain physiologic processes to occur, such as hydrolysis, right? Hydrolysis is how we split molecules up in order to have our metabolism. Or we have dehydration synthesis, where we actually suck a molecule of water out of two materials, and that causes them to be attracted to each other. So we use water to break down and assemble everything inside of our body. So it's an incredibly important nutrient. It's important for temperature regulation, producing bodily fluids, and it balances out our pH. We know that like when we become really acidic, our body stops to functioning the way it's supposed to, or when we become really alkaline, the same thing happens. So we want to pay close attention to what we call our water balance, which is going to exist in two different directions, right? You're either going to be in a positive water balance, which means that you're ensuring that you're plenty hydrated by getting more water coming in than you are using, or we have a negative water balance where we are actually dehydrating our body by we are losing more water than we're consuming, right? And that can lead to things like heat stroke, and like I said, it can make you very acidic. There's a lot of problems associated with it. So how do we ensure that we're being in a positive water balance? Well, ideally, we want to consume around 3.7 liters per day if you're male, or around 2.7 liters per day if you are female. And so that's just barely less than a gallon for most men. Okay, so there is sort of a big breakdown of all of our general nutrition information, but let's go ahead and talk briefly about what it means to be like a nutritional counselor or nutritionist, right? A fitness nutrition specialist, which is the example in our case. And so our role is going to be to assist in gaining confidence for making effective dietary changes, right? We're not necessarily telling somebody how to change. We're simply gathering information which will allow us to kind of understand their background and assess things. We can help them develop their own goals. We can provide nutritional education in order to guide them in a specific direction. We can summarize that information, and then we can continue to coach and encourage our clients, right? So we are applying guided self-help as a main principle here, right? We're not telling someone what to do. We're simply educating them and allowing them to make healthy decisions. So if you're going to do this, right, a big part of the counseling process and the coaching process is recognizing whether or not your client is actually ready and able to make some of these big overt changes within their life. And so we have a way of describing that, which we're going to call the stages of change. And the stages of change is going to describe how individuals actually change their habits. It's going to consist of pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. And ideally, we want to go in that order, right? Start to finish. Pre-contemplation are clients who are not intending on making a change within the next 6 months. Contemplation clients are people who are intending to make a change within the next 6 months. Preparation are individuals who are thinking about changing sometime within the next 30 days. Maybe they've even taken like a few specific changes in their life, like they purchased a gym membership or they've met with you. And then action is somebody who has made changes, but they haven't necessarily maintained it for a full 6-month period yet, right? Like they've been coming to their sessions regularly, they've been eating regularly, they've been tracking their food in a food log, but they haven't necessarily been doing that for a very long time yet. And so that's somebody who's in the action stage. And then if they're in maintenance, they've been doing that for 6 months, they're pretty confident, they're not really at a huge risk for falling backwards, but we are going to still continue coaching them in order to continue moving them forward to maybe bigger and better goals. So going back and talking a little bit about like how, we are going to gather information about like what someone's current status is, right, which is a big part of what we do. We need to either do like a nutritional or fitness assessment, right? And so a fitness assessment is going to tell us about somebody's like posture and fitness status, whereas a nutritional assessment is going to tell us a little bit about someone's like dietary intake, right? And so it's a way for us to gather adequate data so that we can make the right types of decisions. If your client has a healthy body fat percentage, a healthy weight, well, then we know we can draw a conclusion that like weight loss is likely not their goal and probably not a very good one for them. So instead, we can focus on something else. So body composition assessments include things like the body mass index, which is categorizing somebody's body composition based on their weight in kilograms divided by their height in meters squared. We also have waist circumference measurements, where we measure abdominal girth at the narrowest part of the waist. We do know that excessive belly fat has been associated with certain diseases and conditions. Also looking at a waist to hip ratio, which is comparing the narrowest part of the waist with the widest part of the hips. When that ratio is outside of normal ranges, we see another increased risk for disease. Body composition or body fat percentage assessments as well, which is assessing someone's overall body fat, fat mass, and bone mineral density. And so once we have all of that information, then we can start to look at like maybe like if they fall outside of normal ranges, we can look at how that sort of started to happen, right? And so we can look at like our dietary intake logs, such as like a food log, which is tracking your food progress or tracking your food intake over like 1, 3, or 7 days. 24-hour dietary recall, which is a very fast, very easy version where you simply just walk back over the last 24 hours, or even like a food frequency questionnaire. It's like, how often do you have certain types of junk food, right? All of that can allow us to kind of fill in the background for why some of these numbers might be out of whack. So when we are guiding our clients, right, we want to help them understand the concept of energy balance, right? This is one of the key principles of understanding weight loss or weight gain. And what an energy balance is it's the amount of energy coming in versus the amount of energy going out. So how much energy you're expending per day versus how much food you are consuming. And so a positive energy balance is where there is more calories coming in versus the amount of calories going out through activity each day. And so that is going to result in weight gain versus a negative energy balance, which is going to be a state in which there is actually more energy being burned than you are consuming, which means that your body's going to have to find a way to get the energy that it needs. If you consumed 500 less calories than you burned in a day, it had to find a place to get those 500 calories. And so it's likely going to tap into your glycogen stores or fat stores, or if it's done improperly, into your muscle stores. And so those are the energy balances that we're kind of looking at there. Now, that's a big part of our coaching process, right? Helping people understand energy balance. But another thing, like we've been talking about, sort of a through line through this whole talk, is making sure that we are making nutrient dense food options, right? Food choices, right? We want to consume foods that are very nutrient dense. And so when we're looking at that, one of the best ways to do that is to teach our clients how to use the MyPlate food guidance system. Which sort of replaced like the traditional food pyramid that we might have learned about when we were kids. And it's a system that's designed to help people make healthy choices by comparing the quantity of servings from each food group, primarily fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and lean proteins, by comparing that to the number of servings suggested per meal. So the idea here is it's like a blueprint for a healthy plate, right? If half of your plate is fruits and vegetables, a quarter of it is like whole grains, and another quarter of it is a lean, healthy protein, that's going to be a pretty darn healthy meal, right? And so it can help us avoid oversized portions where half of your plate is like a big sirloin steak or something. And it focuses, again, on those nutrient-dense foods rather than energy-dense ones. So that is kind of a review of everything that might show up on your final. Hopefully that leaves you guys informed. And good luck, everybody. I'm sure you're going to kick some butts. So let's go ahead and end this here.